Welcome to InfoSet Daily, your shortcut to the latest in all things cybersecurity.
Ready to dive in?
You bet. Today we're looking at, well, a lot actually.
A real buffet of cybersecurity chaos.
That's one way to put it. Spikes in cyber incidents, critical infrastructure vulnerabilities, and the expanding reach of state-sponsored hackers, just to name a few.
Sounds like a typical day in the world of cybersecurity, though.
Unfortunately, you might be right. But let's jump right in, shall we?
Sounds good to me.
First up, we're heading down under to New Zealand. Their National Cybersecurity Center is reporting a record number of cyber incidents. What's the situation there?
Well, they just released their annual report. For the year end in June 2024, they recorded over 7,000 cybersecurity incidents.
7,000? Wow, that's a huge number.
It's a big jump from previous years. And while a lot of those incidents were, typical cybercrime targeting individuals and businesses, what's really concerning is the increase in what they're calling incidents of national significance.
Those are the more sophisticated and targeted attacks, right?
Exactly. These are the ones aimed at critical infrastructure and large organizations.
How many of those did they see?
343.
And that's just in New Zealand alone.
Right. And of those, a significant portion, 110 to be exact, were linked to state-sponsored actors.
Any particular countries standing out?
The report points to a noticeable increase in activity from Russian state-sponsored actors and pro-Russian hacktivist groups.
Cyber warfare is, unfortunately, becoming an increasingly common tool in geopolitical conflicts. And this adds another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation.
It definitely does. But shifting gears for a second, let's talk about ransomware. Despite all the efforts to disrupt their operations, these attacks are still a major problem.
They really are, and they're not just encrypting data and demanding ransom anymore. What are some of the new tactics we're seeing?
Well, one thing is that they're really leveraging stolen data. So in addition to encrypting your data, they're threatening to leak sensitive information if you don't pay up.
So they're essentially doubling down on the pressure.
Yeah, they're finding new ways to make sure they get paid, and this can be incredibly damaging to an organization both financially and to their reputation.
It's a nightmare scenario.
It is, and we're even seeing them using DDoS attacks to extort victims, especially when the encryption or data leak isn't really a viable option. They're just determined to hold you hostage no matter what.
Speaking of holding things hostage, there's a growing concern about the vulnerability of critical infrastructure. In fact, there are urgent calls to strengthen cybersecurity for the U.S. Coast Guard.
You're right. The maritime transportation system, which includes ports, waterways, and the vessels themselves, it's surprisingly vulnerable to cyber attacks.
And this is a big deal.
Absolutely. We're talking about trillions of dollars in goods moving through the system every year. If it were to be disrupted, it could cripple global trade. The impact would be massive.
So what's the main problem here?
Well, a lack of investment in modern infrastructure and a comprehensive strategy to address cyber threats.
So they're facing a lot of the same challenges we see with other government agencies: outdated technology, limited budgets, and a shortage of cybersecurity professionals.
Yeah, it's a familiar story, unfortunately.
And while we're talking about critical infrastructure, there's been some activity from a Russian state-backed hacking group.
This is Seashell Blizzard, linked to Russia's GRU. They've been observed targeting critical infrastructure in North America and other parts of the world.
Seashell Blizzard, they've been behind some pretty significant attacks in the past.
Right, think destructive malware like kill disk, supply chain attacks, and ransomware operations like NotPetya.
So they're a very serious threat. And they're not just sticking to one region.
No, they've expanded their reach beyond Ukraine and Europe to North America, Central Asia, and the Middle East.
So this really highlights that cyber attacks are a global problem. It's not just one country's issue.
Exactly. It's a global issue that demands global cooperation and a unified response.
So what are they doing exactly? What kind of attacks are they carrying out?
Well, according to Microsoft, they're exploiting vulnerabilities in common IT management tools like Connect with Irene Connect and Fortinet FortiClient EMS.
So they're going after the tools that are used to manage and secure networks.
Yeah, and once they compromise these systems, they can gain undetected access to networks.
From there, they can do whatever they want. Espionage, disruption. It's really scary stuff.
It is, and because they're so good at covering their tracks, these attacks are incredibly difficult to detect and prevent.
So what can organizations do to protect themselves?
Well, they need to be extremely vigilant and proactive in their cybersecurity approach. Patching known vulnerabilities is crucial, but it's not enough on its own.
What else can they do?
They need a multi-layered approach. Network segmentation, robust authentication, and a zero-trust security framework are essential.
Zero trust, that's where you assume that every user and every device is a potential threat until they're verified?
That's the idea. It's like having a really good security guard at the entrance to your network, checking credentials and making sure everything is legitimate.
That makes sense. You can't just trust anyone or anything these days.
Exactly. You need to verify everything.
Speaking of verifying things, let's talk about patching. CISA and the FBI have issued a warning about an increase in attacks exploiting buffer overflow vulnerabilities.
Oh yeah, that's a classic one.
It's an oldie but a goodie, I guess.
I guess you could say that. It's a technique that's been around for ages, but it's still effective.
So how does it work?
Basically, it exploits how a program manages its memory. Attackers can insert more data than a program's buffer can handle.
And then what happens?
That extra data, it overflows into nearby memory locations. It can corrupt data or overwrite important code.
And that gives the attackers an opening.
Right. They can inject malicious code that runs with the same privileges as the program that was compromised.
So that could lead to those sorts of problems. System crashes, data breaches, even complete control over the system.
Yep, it's a big problem, and the worst part is these vulnerabilities are still pretty common.
Even in software from major vendors like Microsoft, VMware, and Avanti.
Even them, it's everywhere.
So what are CISA and the FBI recommending?
They're urging organizations to switch to memory-safe programming languages like Rust.
Rust, that's been getting a lot of attention lately.
It has. It's designed to prevent memory-related errors like buffer overflows.
So it's a safer alternative to languages like C and C++ too.
That's the idea.
It's like building a house with stronger materials from the start, rather than trying to patch up holes after it's built.
That's a good analogy.
It's a proactive approach to software development that could significantly reduce the number of vulnerabilities we're dealing with.
It could really change things if it catches on.
Let's hope it does. Now, shifting our focus to the cloud, there's a new ransomware attack targeting Amazon Web Services' S3 buckets.
This one's concerning. S3 is a very popular cloud storage service. A lot of businesses rely on it.
So how does this attack work?
Attackers are exploiting misconfigured S3 buckets. Sometimes these buckets are accidentally made public so anyone can access them.
So it's a configuration issue.
It is, and it highlights the importance of properly configuring your cloud storage and understanding the shared responsibility model.
That's where the cloud provider is responsible for securing the underlying infrastructure, but the user is responsible for configuring their services securely.
Exactly. It's a shared responsibility.
So once the attackers get access to these misconfigured buckets, what do?
They encrypt the data and demand a ransom. It's your classic ransomware playbook.
But in this case, it's targeting cloud storage, which is often seen as more secure than traditional on-premises infrastructure.
Right, so it kind of challenges that perception. Cloud services are not immune to ransomware.
This should be a wake-up call for anyone using cloud services. They need to take cloud security just as seriously as they take on-premises security.
Absolutely. It's not a one-time thing. It requires constant vigilance, regular security audits, and a thorough understanding of that shared responsibility model.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is, but it's essential. Back again with more breaking news.
Always something new happening in the world of cybersecurity.
You got that right. Today we have a new player on the ransomware scene, RA World.
What do we know about them so far?
Well, the thing that caught everyone's attention is they're using a tool that's usually associated with Chinese APT groups.
APT. That's Advanced Persistent Threat, right?
You got it. These are typically state-sponsored hacking groups.
So does this mean the Chinese government is behind these ransomware attacks?
It's too soon to say for sure. Investigations are ongoing, but attributing cyber attacks can be really tricky.
It always feels like a giant puzzle.
It is, but it does raise some interesting questions. If the Chinese government isn't behind it, then who is?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. It just goes to show that the lines between state-sponsored hacking and cybercrime are getting blurrier all the time.
Absolutely, and that makes things even more complicated. But on a more positive note, there have been some significant arrests in connection with a couple of other ransomware operations, Phobos and 8base.
Oh, that's good to hear. Can you remind our listeners about those two?
Sure. Phobos has been active since 2018, and they're estimated to have hit over 1,000 organizations worldwide. They've made millions from these attacks.
And 8base.
They're newer, came on the scene around 2022, and they're known for using a multi-extortion model.
Meaning?
So they don't just encrypt your data, they also threaten to leak it if you don't pay up. Just another way to pile on the pressure.
So who got arrested?
2 Russian nationals, Roman Berezhnoy and Igor Nikolaevich Glerov. Along with them, 2 women, but their identities haven't been released yet.
What were their roles in all of this?
They're facing a whole bunch of charges for cybercrimes, including conspiracy to commit computer fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering.
Sounds like they're in a lot of trouble.
Definitely. These arrests are a major win in the fight against ransomware. It sends a message to other criminals that they're not untouchable.
Let's hope it makes them think twice before launching another attack. Now, Microsoft had a pretty quiet February patch Tuesday this time around.
Yeah, only 55 flaws patched, which is less than usual.
Does that mean we can finally relax a bit, take a break from all this patching?
Not so fast. While it was a smaller batch, there are still some critical vulnerabilities that need immediate attention.
Such as?
Well, there were fixes for 4 zero-day vulnerabilities, and 2 of those were actively being exploited.
0 day, meaning attackers are already using them before a patch is even available.
Right, it's a race against time.
What were those 2 that were being exploited?
One was a flaw in the Windows AFD for WinSock, which could allow an attacker to execute code remotely. Pretty serious stuff. And the other one was a privilege escalation flaw in Hyper-V.
Hyper-V, that's Microsoft's virtualization platform.
Yeah. So this flaw could let an attacker with limited access gain full control over the whole system.
Ouch. So even though it was a lighter patch Tuesday, there's still plenty to keep security teams busy.
That's the thing about cybersecurity. There's always something that needs attention. You can't ever really let your guard down.
And just to prove your point, there's a new Android malware making the rounds. BTMOB rat.
This one's spreading through phishing sites disguised as popular streaming services and mining platforms.
So they're tricking people into downloading what they think is a legitimate app.
Exactly. But once BTMOB rat is installed, it can do a lot of damage.
Like what?
Keylogging, screen recording, stealing your personal info, you name it. It can even control your device remotely.
So basically turns your phone into a spy device.
Pretty much. It's like the attacker has a direct line into your phone watching everything you do.
How are they getting people to download it?
They're using some pretty clever tactics. One is impersonating a popular trickish streaming service called iNat TV. People think they're getting free movies and shows, but they're actually installing malware.
And the mining platform angle?
That one plays on people's desire to make easy money. They're lured in by the promise of quick profits, but it's just a trap.
So what can people do to protect themselves?
The usual precautions apply. Be careful about clicking links, only download apps from official stores, and keep your software up to date.
Good advice. Now, switching gears again, there's a new organization that just launched called the Cyber Monitoring Center.
This one's interesting. They're aiming to develop a more objective and transparent way to assess cyber incidents.
What's the idea behind it?
They want to create something like a Richter scale for earthquakes or the Saffir-Simpson scale for hurricanes, but for cyber attacks.
That's an ambitious goal.
It is, but it comes from a real need for more clarity in the cyber insurance industry.
Because there's been a lot of controversy around how attacks are attributed and whether or not coverage applies.
Exactly. It's a mess. So this new organization is trying to bring some order to the chaos.
To standardize things and make the whole process more transparent.
That's the hope. It'll be interesting to see if they can pull it off. It could have a big impact on the industry.
It certainly could.
Now let's talk about the human factor in all of this, specifically the ethical dilemmas that CISOs face.
CISOs, those are the Chief Information Security Officers.
Right, they're often caught in a tough spot trying to balance compliance requirements with pressure from their own organizations.
It sounds like a stressful job.
It can be. They're tasked with protecting their organizations from attacks, but they're also under constant pressure to cut costs and make sure security doesn't get in the way of business.
So it's a constant balancing act between security and productivity. And those two things don't always play nicely together.
Got it. And to make matters worse, a recent study found that a surprising number of CISOs have been pressured by other executives to cover up compliance violations.
So they're being asked to sweep security problems under the rug.
Basically. And that puts them in a really difficult position. Do they risk their careers by speaking up, or do they compromise their ethics by staying silent?
It's a classic catch-22.
Yes. So what's the solution?
That's the tough question.
It all comes down to building a culture of security within organizations. Everyone from the top down needs to understand the importance of cybersecurity and make it a priority.
So it's not just the CISO's problem, it's everyone's responsibility. We're back for our final segment of InfoSec Daily. We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's still some important news to discuss before we wrap things up.
We'll finish up by looking at a story that really highlights the human side of cybersecurity. We'll talk about the ethical dilemmas that chief information security officers often face. They're frequently caught between trying to maintain compliance and dealing with pressure from within their own organizations.
Yeah, it sounds like a really tough balancing act. Could you give us some more details about the challenges CISOs are up against?
So, CISOs have this critical job of protecting their organizations from cyber attacks, which is getting harder and harder in our interconnected world, But at the same time, they often face pressure from other executives, to keep costs down and make sure security measures don't disrupt business operations. So it can be a real tug of war between security priorities and business goals.
It's like trying to balance security with productivity. And those two don't always go hand in hand, unfortunately. So what kind of ethical challenges are we talking about here? What are CISOs actually struggling with?
Well, a recent study actually found that a significant number of CISOs have felt pressured by other executives to Well, to basically hide compliance violations.
Really? So they're being asked to sweep security issues under the rug and just hope they go away.
It's a pretty troubling trend. It puts CISOs in a really tough spot. They have to choose between doing what they know is right, which could risk their jobs, or staying silent, which compromises their ethics.
So it's like a classic catch-22 situation. What could be done about this? How do we fix this problem?
It's a complex issue. No easy answers, unfortunately. But the key is really to create a culture of security within organizations. That means everyone, from the CEO all the way down to the newest employee, needs to understand and prioritize cybersecurity.
Cybersecurity isn't just the CISO's job. It's a team effort. Everyone has to play their part. Well, we've certainly had a lot to think about today. It seems like the cybersecurity landscape is constantly changing, new threats popping up all the time.
It definitely keeps us on a toes. To stay ahead of the curve, you need to be constantly vigilant, adaptable, and always willing to learn. That's why it's so important to stay informed about the latest developments and keep these conversations going.
Absolutely. Awareness is key. The more you know about the threats out there, the better you can protect yourself and your organization. We hope this deep dive into the latest cybersecurity news has provided you with some valuable insights.
Remember, knowledge is power.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on what we discussed today. What resonated most with you? What are your biggest concerns? Let us know in the comments.
And be sure to tune in again tomorrow for another deep dive into the constantly evolving world of cybersecurity.
Stay safe and stay informed.